Hello and welcome. This is the Chehalis Basin Strategy webinar called Be Aware, Be Prepared, Flood Risks and Resources. I am Jen Tice with Ross Strategic, a contractor to the Office of Chehalis Basin. As we get settled today, we'll launch a poll that asks whether you attended the last webinar on the flood warning system that we held at the beginning of the month. Casey, do you want to launch that? So if you're just joining us, we have a poll up that is asking about whether you attended the last webinar on the Chehalis River Basin flood warning system. It's not necessary to have attended that webinar, but we're just curious as we get started. We'll take a moment to let folks respond to the poll and then begin our webinar shortly. All right, it looks like 42% of those who responded did attend the last webinar and 58% did not. So pretty good attendance. If you did not attend it, that's okay, and you're still interested. That recording is available on the Chehalis Basin Strategy YouTube link, and that link is available in the chat. And I think next we'll go on to our next slide. And before I go in to more details, I just wanted to check if our interpretation is set up.
Yes, it is, Jen.
Awesome. Okay. So we do have interpretation in Spanish available for this webinar, which is a new feature that we're offering on these webinars. We'll go over the details of Zoom logistics shortly. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Jen Tice. I'm with Ross Strategic, a contractor to the Office of Chehalis Basin. I support the Community Flood Assistance and Resilience Program, which you'll be hearing more about later today. It's also known as the CFAR program. We have two panelists on today's webinar. Our first panelist is Kat Dickey. Kat joined the Office of Chehalis Basin in August as the office's new flood risk reduction program coordinator. She recently earned her MPA from the University of Washington Evans School, focusing on environmental policy. Before graduate school, she worked in Arizona for 5 years for a conservation nonprofit. This work included how forest fire burn scars can contribute to future flooding. Our other panelist will be French Wetmore. French is president of French and Associates, which is a floodplain management consulting firm. He has over 40 years of experience with flood response plans and property protection programs around the country. And he's worked with the Chehalis Basin communities since 2014. So we're very pleased to have both Kat and French join us today. And then before getting into the content, Casey is going to go over some Zoom logistics. So next slide, please.
Hello, everybody. Just a couple of Zoom logistics to start our night off. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees are muted at the moment. And if you do have technical difficulties or get kicked out and can't get back in, please email me at chart@rossstrategic.com. At the bottom, you have a panel of buttons, and there's an enable live transcripts with the full transcript setting. And also you can listen to the Spanish interpretation with the interpretation setting. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. We also do have a question and answer that will be enabled during the entire presentation. And you can drop your questions in. You can like other people's questions if you also have that question. And there will be designated times when these will be answered. And please note that the chat and raise hand feature are disabled at the moment. At the end of the webinar, if you do need to raise your hand to ask questions, you can hit *9 if you're on your cell phone. We'll call your name and ask you to unmute. Thank you, and back to you, Kat.
All right, so before we get into the content of today's webinar, I thought I would give an overview of the Chehalis Basin Strategy for folks that they might not be as familiar. So the Chehalis Basin Strategy is a network of partners who are hard at work to make the Chehalis Basin a safe and healthy place to live for people, fish, and wildlife. The strategy is administered by the Office of the Chehalis Basin, which is in the Washington State Department of Ecology and is led by the Chehalis Basin Board. The board has community leaders as well as representatives from local, state, and tribal governments. The strategy is supported and carried out by partners, including local nonprofits, governments, and residents. We create resources and fund on-the-ground projects to restore habitat for aquatic species and protect residents from increasingly dangerous flood damage. At the same time, we're planning for large-scale, long-term solutions so the basin continues to be safe, healthy, and abundant place to live for generations to come. Next slide. Since 2012, state and local partners have invested nearly $100 million to fund more than 100 projects that benefit both people and aquatic life. These projects include things like evacuation routes and the early flood warning system that we had last webinar earlier this month on, as well as flood protections, raised farm paths, fish barrier passage corrections, and habitat restoration projects. Next slide. So tonight we'll learn about assessing your flood risk, some ways to protect your property from flooding, the importance of flood insurance, and resources that are available to you through the Chehalis Basin Strategy. We'll be following along the Office of Chehalis Basin's Be Aware, Be Prepared guide, which is also available on our website with a Spanish language version that's coming soon. We'll have some Q&A after each portion of the presentation, so feel free to type in questions as we go. All right, next slide.
So I think we were actually going to do a poll here.
Oh, great. I don't have that. Thanks.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to our presenters, we're to speak slowly so that our interpreter can keep up. So what we're hoping to do with this next poll is to get a sense of what brought everyone here to the webinar. So on your screen, you should see the second poll that we have, which asks, what is the main reason that brought you to tonight's presentation? And you can select more than one answer if you like. So the could be, I've been flooded in the past. I own property that is or could be prone to flooding. I want to support others with their flooding issues. I work in emergency preparedness or flood management, or I have a general interest in the topic. And again, you can select more than one answer if you feel that it's too hard to check just one answer. So we'll leave this open for a few moments for people to respond and then see why everyone's here. And then I'll turn it back over to Kat for.
Thanks, Jen.
Next. All right, while people are completing the poll. All right, so it looks like the majority of people on the line, 43%, want to support others with their flooding issues. And right behind that is working in emergency preparedness and flood management, so pretty similar. And then there's 33% that has a general interest in the topic, 24% that own property that could be flooded, or 14% that have been flooded in the past. So kind of a mix of those that are interested in helping others and those that have personal interest in flood protection. So with that, I'll close the poll and turn it back over to you.
Great. So to start off with, we'll go over just a brief overview of the Community Flood Assistance and Resilience Program. I'll refer to it as CFAR, as well as some technical terms you might hear during this presentation. Next slide. So the Community Flood Assistance and Resilience Program, CFAR, is a program that is managed by the Washington State Department of Ecology, Office of Chehalis Basin. CFAR provides both technical assistance and funding to help Chehalis Basin tribes, local governments, residents, and businesses take action to reduce the threat of life and property damage to flooding. I know there's a lot of people that answered that they want to support others or they're working in emergency management. CFAR has local governments as our partners because local governments are key in making their communities safer and more resistant to disaster, like identifying those flood risks and acting to reduce those risks along with managing to higher standards. So although this presentation is really geared towards a lot of the individual actions you can take, local community governments are really center in regulating, managing, and responding to floods. Next slide. So here are some definitions that might come up. These are in the guidebook, so feel free to take notes or just refer to the guidebook later. To the right, you'll see a panel. This is the flood insurance rate map, also referred to as the FIRM. And this is a map published by the National Flood Insurance Program, which delineates special flood hazard areas. Those are the shaded areas on the map. The special flood hazard area has specific regulations as adopted and enforced by the local community. In the special flood hazard area, the ground is lower than the base flood elevation, which we'll talk about in a few bullet points. Zone A, which is the shaded area on this FIRM, means that there's a 1% annual chance of flooding. So if you're thinking about it over the lifespan of a 30-year mortgage, that's a 26% chance of flooding. And just a caveat that these are maps, they're static. They might take a while to get updated. So even if your property is not within the special flood hazard area, that doesn't mean that your risk of flooding is zero. Next slide. So the base flood elevation is the elevation of surface water resulting from a flood that has that 1% annual chance of equaling or exceeding that level in any given year. You may have heard of this referred to as the 100-year flood, which is a bit of a misnomer because you can have two 100-year floods back to back. Next slide. All right. Oh, sorry, go back one. Sorry, Casey. So I forgot the floodway. The floodway is a hatched area that you can see on the left side of this panel. This means that there are special flood regulations within that area. The stream channel is this line that goes down this hatched area, and it means that properties in the floodway risk seeing floodwaters that are deeper or faster flowing. Next slide. So you can also have a flood of record, which is the highest flood recorded at the site. You can see that in the bottom panel, this is actually a map of the flood of record. If you compare it to the top panel, which is the FIRM, we have a base flood elevation of 194 along this one cross section. In this bottom map of the flood of record, we have a base flood elevation of 204 feet. So we really like to think of flood of records when we're thinking about the flood protection level. The flood protection level is For the level of protection. So for insurance, your first floor of living space should be at least as high as that base flood elevation. Most local ordinances require 1 to 2 feet above, and CFAR recommends and funds 3 feet above the base flood elevation or flood of record, whichever is higher. All right, I'm going to hand it off to French to talk about the flood warning system.
All right, thank you, Kat. So one of the first things we would like you to think about is to protect yourself from flood damage and the risk of flood to your life and your family. And so to do that, the first thing you ought to know is the flood going to come? When's it going to come? Would it affect me? So the way to find out is to have your own little personal flood warning system. And we've got 5 steps to put something like that together. So we're going to start with 2.1, which is find your gauge. There are gauges all around our basin. There was a presentation and webinar on November 2nd that you can access here that talks about the gauge system in more detail than I'm going to. We got to find one that's near you, and let me show you how to do that. Go to chehalisriverflood.com, and I think that'll get posted on the chat, and that will give you the screen you see on the right. If you scroll down, you will get this screen, and the place to end up on this page is at the gauge list. So hit that one on the gauge data maps, and you will get a screen that looks like this, which is a map of our basin with lots of green dots. Each green dot is a gauge, and find one close to you. Let's say you're in the Rochester or the Chehalis tribal area. You can enlarge the map and find, if you're on the Black River, that there is a Black River gauge at Highway 12. So this is how to find the gauge that's closest to you. If you click on the Black River gauge and go through a few other clicks, you will end up looking at this graph. This is a graph showing the historical readings at the gauge on the Black River. There are 3 key things it'll tell you. It tells you how high the water got. It tells you when that happened. And doing clicking it to, you will find some history of exactly how high at, in this case, 15-minute intervals. So not only does it show you what's happened recently, it shows you what happens 10, 15, 20 years ago, depending on how long the gauge has been in effect. And that's very useful for knowing what's going to happen in the future. Most of the gauges look like this, have this information. There are some gauges run by the National Weather Service that are closer to the larger populated areas like Chehalis and Centralia, and provide the same information, how high the water goes, when it went there, and the history, and has lots of other additional information that may or may not affect you. But it's really good to know is what's the highest it's ever been when that gauge is there. That's the flood of record that Kat was talking about. The Weather Service gauges show one more thing that's very useful, and that is a prediction of how high it's going to get. And that you can see on this gauge that as the time we took this picture of the gauge, December 20th, the water was at 164 feet above sea level, but it was predicted to go 5 feet higher. That's very useful if the water is at your doorstep now to know that it might be 5 feet deeper in the next day. So if you're lucky, you can be affected or helped or supported by a Weather Service gauge. Now, unless you live right on top of the gauge, you need to make a step here, and that is to figure out when it reads at the gauge, what does it mean for my place? And that's step 2.3, determine what a gauge reading means. There are 3 ways to do that. The first is, well, I remember the flood of 2007, and I remember how high it went. So your historical experience. If you just write that down, and hopefully maybe you even left a mark on a building, that tells basic information. So in January of 2022, the highest the gauge read, because I can look at the gauge online, was 78.3 feet above sea level. And I remember that is 3 feet deep in my garage. That's really useful to know what the relationships are. The Weather Service has a system for several of their gauges. I think there's 7 gauges in the basin that will give you an inundation map. This is a really fun tool. If you notice, there's no flood showing on this map. This is the town of Galvin, and we're using the Grand Mound gauge on the Chehalis River. The elevation at the gauge is 139.2 feet, but nobody in Galvin got wet. At any time, you can get online and do this. You don't have to wait for a real flood. And you can say, what if the gauge reads 141? Now I know which areas of Galvin are going to be underwater, but my house isn't affected yet. What if the gauge reads 142.5? Well, it's getting closer. If the gauge reads 144, I'm soaking wet. So this is a very good tool, not only to tell you about the potential threat to your property, but just as important is, when will the roads be closed? When will it be water on the roads and I shouldn't be driving? And we call that loss of access. And that's something you should be very much concerned about. You may say, well, the flood won't get my house, I'm good. But if you discover that the flood will get your road, and somebody in your family has a heart attack, or your boss tells you got to come to work or get fired, you really want to know you have access to get out, or for help to get to you. There is a 3rd and 4th way of getting this information. The 3rd is call us. We can work with you and get elevation data for your area and relate it to the elevation data at the gauge. So we can help set up some of this for you. And in many cases, your county emergency manager's office can relate, especially telling you historical information, like in the last year, which roads were closed. So this is very useful information to tell you what's going to happen. But does that mean every day, every morning, you should wake up and check your gauge? No, you really only need to worry about it when there's a potential flood, and you can have somebody else watch the gauges for you. This is a page from the guidebook that Kat introduced you to, and you can go to these sites and sign up for a notice that they will tell you on which rivers you sign up for, whether there's a potential of water rising up to a certain stage. Quite useful. So when that call comes in, you should know just which gauge to look at and what that information at the gauge means to you. So this is great for getting information, but what are you going to do about the information? And that gets to 2.5. You should have a plan, and what you should really have is a written plan. We have an example of one at this site that is a real model. It was developed by a gentleman named Mike Smell, who lived inside this yellow box on the Newaukum River near Chehalis. And Mike, before the gauge maps were out, actually developed his own plan, and he could relate a gauge reading with what was going to happen to him. And from this case, for example, you can see from the Weather Service maps that at 2,202.4 feet above sea level, his roads are closed. The water is over the roads, and everybody advises, turn around, don't drown. Don't try to go out and test to see if you could drive through it. If there's water over the road, don't do it. The other thing is when the water gets higher, he knows what it's going to affect. And if you add a foot to that last reading, he's got water all around his buildings and in some of his buildings. So he's got a lot of data on what happens at different levels. He's got little triggering things if the water gets so high or predicted to be so high. He's got a list of things to do. And here's an example of one of them. If the water is going to reach his buildings, he knows it's too deep for his tractor. He's got to get his tractor high and dry. There's no place close enough to drive it to. So he built this ramp. And when he knows it's going to go up to anything over the ground level, he'll drive the tractor up onto the deck. And that gives him another foot or two of protection. He also adds about a half a foot to everything so that he's got a little margin of protection if the gauge readings or predictions are a little off. So this is the kind of thing that we recommend everybody do. And we'd be glad to sit down and work with you on getting the data from the gauges, converting it to something meaningful at your property, and putting together your own flood warning or response plan. I believe now we have check for any questions people have submitted.
Yeah, thanks, French, and also Kat, for your presentation. This is our first opportunity of several for questions that folks may have. I think I'll start off by asking a question about the flood warning present slides you just covered, French, and in particular the flood response plans. And just wondering if you have to have any technical expertise to develop a flood response plan.
Mike did not. The only technical issue is if you really don't have if you have not related gauge readings to what happens at your property. And we've got the flood studies that can do that for you. So we'd be glad to help you. We'd also be happy to walk through your property and give you suggestions and ideas and help you wherever we can. But if you don't have to wait for us to come, if you know a gauge reading at the gauge means what's going to happen at your property, just take a look around and you can get some ideas. Mike's plan is free for downloading, so you can see what he put together and the kinds of things to think about.
Okay, great. And I think that plan is in the chat for folks to look at. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment, but there is that Q&A feature on Zoom. So if others come to mind as we go through the rest of our slides, feel free to type those in. And we do have a couple other opportunities to go through questions. Oh wait, I do have one here. This is more of a comment, actually. Just a note that if you do sign up for the local emergency management alerts, you can get notified of both evacuation notices as well as other life-saving notifications, not just flooding notifications. So thank you for that comment. And next, we'll go back to French for some additional slides on property protection measures.
All righty, that's a good addition there. That warning system that the county does, like a lot of the county activities, can be very useful. And in particular, they're much more local. They know your situation much better than anybody else does. One other thing to think about is when the water comes, not only when can you evacuate, but what can be done to protect your property. So this chapter covers a variety of activities, but I want to start with some of the heads up limiting factors. There are some factors that affect your choice that I want to run through. So there are things you need to know before you pick an option. The first is the flood hazard. Obviously, floods get things wet, but one of the biggest hazards with flooding is velocity. High velocity waters can wash a building away, wash the car away, wash the road away. If you live in an area with high velocities, and that maybe that's a technical thing where we can help you determine that, you really don't want to leave your building there and try to do something to protect it. The best thing is to get out of there. We have had buildings moved off their foundations in the 2007 flood. Second thing is, how deep is the water, particularly if you have a house with a basement. The deeper the water, the more pressure it builds on both the walls and the floor. And so you can end up thinking you're doing fine because you've kept the water out of the house, when in fact the pressure builds to such an extent that it breaks your walls, and you end up with more damage than if you had let the water in. So depth and velocity are key things to know before you decide. The third one is warning time. This may be your ideal house protection measure. Well, they're telling me it's flooding. Great. I'll call some friends, we'll fill some sandbags, and we'll protect the house. Depending on how many friends you have and how many sandbags you own, this may well take a couple of days to do, and you may not have that warning time. So find out what the warning time is. You probably, if you've been flooded, have a good feel for that already. And maybe you can use sandbags, but maybe you limit it to something you could do in 10 minutes. The next factor affecting the choice is the building. I mentioned that buildings with basements are particularly vulnerable to lots of damage. But other kinds of buildings, you may have a lot of flexibility on. Garages, you can let the water in and maybe it doesn't cause much damage. Commercial structures have a lot of flexibility. So crawl space buildings, and most of the buildings in our basin are on crawl spaces, you do have more flexibility with. Related to the building is, what kind of shape is it in? Is it strong enough to withstand some flood forces? And in particular, is it worth protecting? You may find your money is better spent replacing something like this. Here's some of the tough love ones. You got to know about some construction regulations that are regulated and enforced by your city and your county in the unincorporated areas. They are required under federal rules and state laws to enforce some particularly tough regulations. Let me just mention the two most important ones. The first is the substantial improvement rule. Here's how it works. You have a market value of your house. So let's say your house is worth $200,000. You want to build a room addition to the house and upgrade this and put a new roof on and a variety of things. And the cost of that project is more than 50% of the value of your house. So if a $200,000 house, you want to do $150,000 of work to it, that is a substantial improvement. If you have a substantial improvement in the floodplain, in the zone A that Kat showed you earlier, you have to worry about the fact that a substantial improvement must be brought into protection from the base flood. If it's a residence, it has to be elevated above the base flood elevation. If it's a non-residential building, you have to do something. Doesn't have to be elevated. You have a few more options on what to do. So this means if your building is in the floodplain and you want to build a major improvement to it, you may have an additional expense of elevating your building, which is a good thing if you can afford it. Similarly, if your building is substantially damaged, this rule applies. So if the cost of repairing your building is more than 50% of the market value before the damage, and it doesn't have to be a flood, it could be a fire or whatever, this rule will apply. So this is very important for anybody in the floodplain to know about substantial improvement rule. The second rule relates to the floodway, and Kat showed you the floodway as it shows up on maps. So find out if you're in a floodway also, if you're close to the channel. Floodway requirements set by the state is you cannot build a new residential building, a new house, other than a farmhouse, exceptions, in the floodway. So if you have a substantial improvement in the floodway and you have a house, you simply can't stay. In other words, you can't do it. And also you won't be able to build an obstruction to flow. So if you want to build a levee around your house and your house is in the floodway, you would not be allowed to do that. So these are what I said, the tough love. They're designed to get properties out of the floodplain or out of the floodway, or at least improved to the base flood level. And again, we can work with you and talk to you about the details of these. So keep that in mind, along with one final constriction, and that is the cost. You have $100,000, $200,000 house, it costs you $300,000 to rent it. It's your choice, it's your money. But sometimes the cost is simply going to keep you from protecting as well as we would prefer. So let's talk about how to protect it. The best way to protect a building in the floodplain, by our view as floodplain managers, is to get it out of the floodplain. Don't have it exposed to damage. Don't have the residents exposed to the hazard. So acquisition is done and worthwhile where you have the high hazards of velocities and deep waters, where you have loss of access. I've mentioned this a couple of times. I've got a favorite picture of mine of a horror story. This is a flood in Minnesota a few years ago. This is the fire department looking at a building on the other side of the flood. That building is a nursing home. They called for help. The fire department couldn't get to it, and 2 people died in that nursing home that night. Just giving you that shock effect to think about, do you really want to lose access in or out of your property during a flood? Acquisition will fix that for you. It'll take you out of the floodplain. If you're have a substantial improvement in the floodway, acquisition, getting out of there is great. And finally, who's going to buy the house? One thing that might find out is that, let's say you're near a park and the city would like to expand the park or expand some public property. Maybe it's really good to just sell out to somebody who wants the land and rebuild somewhere else. You don't have to demolish the building to leave the floodplain. Relocation is a related option. This is a great story from Grays Harbor County. This is a house on the Minucci River. An aerial was taken in 2006. The problem with the Minucci River at this point is it doesn't stay put. And so it had moved, meandered, migrated to bring that house closer and closer to the river and make it subject to falling over if the banks are eroded. So the Grays Harbor County Conservation District helped the property owner and actually picked up the house and moved it to a new foundation on high ground near the road, on the same owner's property. The owner owned enough land, they were able to do this. So there are cases where relocation is cheaper and for a variety of reasons, more preferred over acquisition and just demolishing the building. And it's doable, as you can see. The next approach on our list of preferences is to elevate the building. If you don't have the velocity or the high hazard, you don't have to move out of the floodplain. Elevating the building is a simple process. You raise it up, you build a new foundation underneath, and you end up with the first floor high and dry. What's below the first floor will still get wet, but think of that area as a very high crawl space, and don't put anything in there that's subject to water damage. The elevation is the most common used measure in our area, and it's one of the easiest things you can do for a building on a crawl space. Most of our buildings are on crawl spaces, so we have a lot of elevated buildings in the area. This house is on the Chehalis River near Rochester. but there's lots of good examples of elevated houses in every community in the basin. The next measure is a barrier. You simply build a little wall of concrete or a levee of earthen fill around your building. This is a great example. This house was in Centralia, and the owner built the wall after being flooded in 2007. It worked for floods that happened since then too. Now you don't want to do this in an area with flooding more than 2 feet deep, because then you'll need some seriously engineered walls, and the price will go way up. You may need openings to get in and out, so make sure you've got enough warning time to close any of those openings. Also, make sure that your barrier doesn't push water onto somebody else's property. It's against the law to make things worse for other people. I said this house was in Centralia because the Port Authority bought it and demolished it. But there's another great example of a barrier in Centralia. This is on Pearl Street, south of the Skookumchuck River Bridge. It's Dell's preschool, and it was designed by an engineer. It's a great example. If you get a chance, drive by and take a look at it. Now, that was for shallow water and warning times. There's another good example of a project that you can do with the same two flooding conditions, and it's called dry floodproofing. Think of it as taking that barrier and putting it right up against the wall of the building, like you can see here. The owner of this non-residential building built this concrete apron all around the structure and added removable barriers that are put in place when the warning is issued. So dry floodproofing is only good for buildings on slab-on-grade foundations, because you need to make sure that not only are the walls watertight, but the floor underneath is watertight, because water will completely surround your building. So, speaking of water surrounding your building, let's say you have a basement and you're worried about water pressures breaking into your walls or floor. Wet floodproofing is the measure for you. Wet floodproofing means you simply let the water in. You've got some things that water will damage, like a furnace or a water washing machine. Move them up to the higher area, or if it's not so deep, put your valuables on blocks or up on higher shelves. So wet floodproofing works well for crawl spaces and garages. And we've seen some great examples where people have done really nice jobs, and it works. So our final measure is called utility protection. You really want to have electricity and water after a flood, especially if you've got a mess to clean up, which you will. So you can see there are some relatively cheap ways to protect your valuable utility fixtures. Simply elevate them, put them on a platform, or somehow locate them so water won't reach them. So those are the various ways you can protect your house or your business from flood damage. You'll notice that I went from the most expensive to the least expensive. Not surprisingly, the most expensive is the most effective, and the least expensive provides the least amount of protection. But for a small expense, you may get a lot of protection for your utilities. It'll take some time and some thought and maybe even some flood data to determine what's best for your property. But remember, we can help you. You're not in this alone.
So we are going to continue with our slideshow, additional information, skipping the questions for now and just going on to Kat to cover the other thing you can do to prepare yourself for floods, which is flood insurance.
Great, thanks, Jen. So French talked through a lot of things that you can do to the home itself in order to protect it from flooding. But flood insurance is a great way to protect not only your assets, but your financial well-being during a flood. Next slide. So you have two kinds of options to buy flood insurance. The first being the National Flood Insurance Program, which is the federal flood insurance program. You could also choose private insurance. You may be required to buy flood insurance if you are in the special hazard flood area, so one of those zone A, and you have a government-backed mortgage or loan. However, even if you are not in a special hazard flood area, we still, recommend to buy and maintain that flood insurance because you could still be at risk of flooding. Your flood insurance can be purchased through many different insurance carriers. Floodsmart.gov is a great resource to find carriers that sell NFIP policies, or if you currently have home insurance already, you could just talk to your agent. Flooding is a really expensive strain on your finances. Just 1 inch of water can cause $25,000 of damage to your home. You might think, oh, just wait for FEMA money, right? Well, the average FEMA loan or grant is only about $5,000. In 2018, the average flood insurance claim was $40,000. So that's a huge gap that you might have to fill yourself. And even though I'm only talking about, FEMA money or flood insurance, your local communities might have dollars for you. So if you do get flooded, make sure you're reaching out to your jurisdictions. All right, next slide. You can buy 2 kinds of policies, structural or a contents policy. I believe we had a question from a renter in the Q&A. You can just buy a contents policy if you're a renter. There are some things that are not covered in a structural or contents policy. So I know basements aren't common in the basin, but if you do have a basement, anything stored there wouldn't be covered by a policy. Things outside of your home, like a car or other things outside wouldn't be covered. The main thing I want to highlight is that there is a 30-day waiting period for NFIP policies. So today is November 30th. If you purchased it tomorrow, it wouldn't take effect until January 1st. So just keep that in mind. And then costs will vary, so work with your insurance agent. Next slide. Great, so private flood insurance is an option. It's come a long way in the past couple years. 2 main differences might be cost. So we have found in the basin that private policies are cheaper, but there is no guarantee that your policy won't be dropped if you submit a large claim. The NFIP won't drop you after a large claim. The other main difference I'll highlight now is just availability. There might not be private insurance in all the areas of the basin, whereas anyone living in the basin can purchase an NFIP policy. All right, and we are coming out with a 1-pager that will have some of the differences between NFIP and private insurance. And again, this is something the office can help you understand as well. Next slide. All right, resources. So there are a lot of resources available to you. So in addition to our website, the Chehalis Basin Strategy, we've also been linking some of those local websites, and some more people have also been putting in links to their emergency management divisions. They're a great resource for more information. Our website is a repository for some of the documents that we mentioned today, such as the guidebook. You can also request for assistance through our assistance request portal, which Casey just linked in the chat. So say you submit an assistance request, office staff are here to help. We'll follow up with that request. We'll probably want some more information about what you're looking for, and if it necessitates it, we can arrange a site visit, as well as help you come up with some of those individual recommendations. We've answered, questions about elevation certificates, flood insurance. We've helped develop flood response plans, and more. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. And the other thing, since we have so many local jurisdictions here tonight, staff can also help with those education and outreach components. All right. Are you back on time, Q&A?
I think we're back on time. So
All
now we have
right.
some opportunity for questions, and we have had a few come in. So one of the ones that just came in is one that I think you just answered, Kat, around how would I request someone to come out and give me flooding suggestions. So these links up here are some ways that you could do that. You could email or look at the website. Also that request form that Casey just included in the chat are ways that you could contact the Office of Chehalis Basin to get that support that Kat was just describing.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, you know, a lot of the support that we're offering is those mitigation type activities. So before flood, your local jurisdictions are really the place for those post-flood and during flood response activities.
Yeah, and someone actually just chatted that the local jurisdictions have other opportunities and resources both before, during, and after disaster. So we had a question about renters. So what if I'm a renter and don't own a property? Can the office still work with me to protect the home I live in? So I think that's for you, Kat.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, you can certainly reach out to us for help. You know, there are some things like structural modifications that we won't be able to help you unless, you know, whoever owns the house is also in the loop. But helping you get flood insurance, that contents flood policy is something we can talk you through, and certainly reach out to us and we can figure out more about your situation. So I'm giving you an oblique answer right now. Talk to us.
Yes. The general answer is yes.
Yeah.
So, then I have some very particular questions. So these are, one is, where do you get sandbags? And another one is, how do you find out when you're flooded whether the sediment left behind is toxic? So French, over to you for those two questions.
You can actually order sandbags through Amazon. You can buy them, but sometimes when there's a flood coming, a community may make them available at no cost. So before you spend your money, I would recommend checking with your local emergency manager, especially the county emergency manager. And I'll throw the same answer to the second question about the sediment left behind. That is pretty important. I've seen a whole neighborhood shut down until they ran enough tests of PCBs in the water that flooded the area. So again, go to your emergency manager. I would hope if they have information that leads them to think that there's a hazard in the water, they would make some pretty broad announcements and make sure the message gets to you. But if you have any doubts on stuff, particularly on these kinds of questions about how things are locally done, contact your county emergency manager office.
Great. So we may have some more questions coming in, but I do want to launch one final poll before we close out. And then if there's time, we can cover another question or comment. This question is asking about what action you will take after tonight's webinar. And this is also a multiple choice poll. So the options are, you could share the recording with a community member, connect with the Office of Chehalis Basin, look into flood insurance, do additional research or look into additional materials, prepare a household response plan, modify something in your house to protect against flood damage, or the final one is you're 100% prepared and need no further precautions. So again, you could select multiple options depending on what is most appropriate for your situation. And we'll leave this open for a little while before wrapping up the webinar. I did get a comment around the hazardous question, just that people recommend that you should assume floodwater is hazardous unless you know otherwise. So
That's a really good point. For one thing, there's going to be sediment in it, which is not something you want left in the property. We don't know who's living in it, bugs and stuff. You think, well, I've got no problem. There's no city upstream. I'm just downstream of some farmland. Farmers can put some pretty interesting chemicals in their ground. So I like that point. We should always assume the water is hazardous.
all right. Okay, well, let's see what folks answered in the poll. It looks like sharing the recording and connecting with the office are the top responses, 38%,
Ew.
and do additional research, excuse me. Flood insurance was not as big of a sale, so, but perhaps people
Darn.
are already covered with the flood insurance.
Yeah.
So thanks so
And-
much for weighing in on that. Kat, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are a lot of resources available, and always feel free to contact us if you feel overwhelmed and want more direction of where to look. Your communities are a great resource, and our office can also help do similar presentations in your communities if you think that would be beneficial. So sorry that the insurance wasn't a bigger sell, but it's a great way to protect yourself.
Yes. And with that, I would just like to thank all of our panelists, Kat and French, for their presentations and responses to questions. Also, thank you to Izzy Zucker and Casey Hart for supporting the webinar. And also thank you to everyone who attended tonight's webinar and provided questions and comments. And I encourage you to share this recording with anyone else that you think would benefit from it. It will be posted on the Chehalis Basin Strategy YouTube channel later this year. And have a great evening.